Last night, Pakistan dropped possibly dozens of bombs on Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan, and Pakistan said they were targeting the leadership of the Taliban. One of the people killed in these airstrikes was a leader of the Taliban, which is huge news. Now, this is actually the first time that Pakistan has ever carried out airstrikes onto Afghanistan's capital, Kabul, so this is really an extra big deal. Pakistan has bombed Afghanistan before, but they've never bombed the capital, and they've never bombed them the amount that they bombed them last night. Though at the moment it's way too early to know much. This only happened about 3 or 4 hours ago at the time of recording this, so it's hard to know what to make of it, but it does seem like it's been getting worse over that 3 or 4 hour period. Now, Afghanistan hasn't directly spoke on this yet, but a lot of group chats in Afghanistan related to the Taliban are discussing carrying out attacks on Pakistan now in response to this. Afghanistan still hasn't officially confirmed or denied anything or let on to how many people have died, but what we do know is that these strikes did happen last night. And of course, I really wouldn't rule out Afghanistan getting revenge on Pakistan, whether it's just by supporting groups that want to attack Pakistan or something else. But this really is quite big news. This is the first time that Pakistan has bombed Afghanistan in nearly a year, and it's the first time, and by far the biggest attacks, that they've ever carried out onto Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan. But if you're new here, this is my daily news recap where I summarise all of the most important news from the last 24 hours, which you probably haven't heard about. Well, at least I hope you haven't heard about it, because otherwise you'll get a bit bored. But next up, the US just killed Colombian citizens after they bombed what they thought was a Venezuelan drug boat, but they got that pretty wrong. The Colombian president today said, quote, "We have intelligence that the most recently destroyed boat was Colombian, and it had Colombians on board." Now, obviously, the US said their intelligence was 100% sure that this was a Venezuelan drug boat carrying Venezuelan drugs, but the Colombian president is checking them on this. In fact, Colombia is pressuring the US to release the names of those Venezuelans that were on board. And obviously, the US can't do that because Colombia says these weren't Venezuelans. But Colombia says they know who were on board and they know their names, meaning if the US releases the names, it will prove who the citizens were. And if the US says the wrong names, it means the US bombed Colombian citizens, which is huge news. The Colombian president said, quote, "A new theatre of war has opened up, this time in the Caribbean." And this suggests that Colombia is incredibly pissed off over this, and to be fair, they've got a good reason for that. The US has killed their citizens. But either way, Colombia is treating this as though it's a war now, at least that's what the Colombian president just said. But as I'm unbiased, I will say the US has completely rejected this claim by Colombia. They said, quote, "We demand Gustavo Petro retract this baseless and reprehensible statement." But it is worth knowing that 2 US officials have said something completely different to this. They've said it in confidentiality, so we don't know who the US officials were, but they said that at least on one of the boats that the US has bombed, there were Colombian citizens on board. So the US is not only bombing Venezuelan boats, we know that, but on some of those boats, there's definitely been Colombian citizens which have been killed, which makes this situation a whole lot bigger, as it drags Colombia into the war as well. But on the topic of the US going into lots of wars, the US has just sent 200 troops to Gaza, but seemingly this has been done to help support the ceasefire deal which was agreed on yesterday. But as you'd expect, a lot of people are saying that this could very easily drag the US into the war. There's 200 US troops in the Middle East now, which if they're attacked, the US is not going to put up with. Now, you probably know, especially if you watched my video yesterday, you would know that Israel and Gaza have agreed on the US proposed ceasefire deal, and it's taking place this weekend. But because of that, the US President Trump wants to make sure that this ceasefire deal holds, probably mainly because it makes him look good because he's negotiated this ceasefire deal. But either way, he sent 200 troops to make sure that that happens. Now, it's worth knowing that these US troops aren't actually going to be soldiers that are on the ground fighting, holding people back. These troops are there to just help out the Israeli forces to make sure everything goes smoothly. Specifically, not only are these troops and service members going to be there to help Israel, but they're also going to be there to help Gaza. They're going to be there to help get humanitarian aid in, get the hostages out, etc. And they're actually going to be building a, quote, civil military coordination center to be able to help Israel do all of this. But this isn't just an idea by the US President Trump, like a lot of the things he says. This is actually happening. These US troops, at least some of them, are already arriving in Israel, and some of them are already there. Now, as you'd expect, as I said, there's been a huge amount of backlash to this, because this is a big risk to the US. If these troops are attacked by either side, most likely Gaza, it could definitely bring the US into a war. And that's because Trump is simply not going to put up with these American service members being attacked by a group in Gaza that he already hates the guts of. But super worth knowing about This is a huge deal, and I'll be keeping you updated on this over the next few days. Right, kind of sticking to the same subject of Israel, but really not much. The leader of Belgium has just survived an assassination attempt. And what's important is that the leader of Belgium supports Gaza, and he doesn't really support Israel. Today, Belgium announced that they found out about and stopped a plan to fly an explosive drone into the Prime Minister of Belgium and kill him. I'm serious. It's a pretty brutal way to go, which is why it's quite a big deal. But Belgium said, quote, 3 individuals are under investigation for an attempted terrorist murder and participation in the activities of a terrorist group. But this really is quite a big deal. If this had gone ahead and it had been successful, it could have thrown Europe into chaos. Belgium said, quote, the suspects aimed to construct a small drone which an explosive payload could be attached. This really is unprecedented in Belgium, though, and to be fair, in most of Europe. The Belgium Deputy Prime Minister said, quote, we are deeply shocked at this news. And the Defence Minister was a bit more supportive of him and upbeat. He said, quote, Prime Minister Bart, never surrender. You have all of our support for you and your family. Not many more details have actually been released, as you would expect, but what Belgium did say is that they discovered explosives just a few hundred meters away from where the Prime Minister of Belgium lives. But really quite a big deal. This could have ended very differently if Belgium didn't stop this attack before it happened. At the moment, we don't know who's behind it. Maybe it could just be these 3 people working alone. I'm sure though more details will be coming out. But something completely different now, which is worth knowing about. You might remember back on Christmas Day last year, sadly a plane crashed in Kazakhstan. If you don't remember, sadly 38 people were killed in that plane crash. It was an Azerbaijani Airlines plane that crashed in Aktau in Kazakhstan. But pretty much as soon as this happened, it looks a little bit suspect. It looked more than like the plane had just fell out the sky and crashed. To be fair, it looked like it had been shot down. I mean, the plane literally had shrapnel marks all up the side of it, which was a dead giveaway. But at the very least, it definitely didn't look like it fell out the sky. Now, almost immediately, because of how close this plane was to Russia, a lot of people started saying that this looks like a Russian air defense system has shot down this plane. And to be fair, it did make sense. The plane was not meant to just fall out the sky. The shrapnel marks were a great indicator of it. It suggested that a Russian air defense missile had exploded next to the plane and it had sent shrapnel all through the plane. But today, after a year of these conspiracy theories, Russia has finally confirmed it, and they've taken responsibility that they shot down this passenger plane last year. Specifically, Putin said that 2 Russian air defense missiles exploded in the near vicinity of this passenger plane as it was flying, as those air defense missiles were trying to shoot down Ukrainian drones that were also near to this plane. It's unknown whether Putin was suggesting that the Ukrainian drones were using the passenger plane as cover, or whether the plane was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the reason it's taken so long for Russia to take responsibility for this does seem to make sense. Russia wanted to make sure 100% that they knew what happened and how it happened. Almost immediately after this plane crashed, Russia launched a full-scale investigation to find out the exact cause of it. To be fair, I think Russia knew that they shot it down, but as you'd expect, they wanted to know how they shot it down and exactly what happened before they told the rest of the world. Putin said, quote, it was our duty to do an investigation in order to give an objective assessment of everything that happened and to identify the true causes of the crash. And at the same time, Putin said Russia will be absolutely compensating the families of the victims who were on board this plane. It doesn't make it right, but it's probably the best thing Russia can do at the minute. It goes without saying, Putin said he was really sorry and Russia had no intention of actually shooting down the passenger plane. Of course, though, it doesn't make it right, but to be fair, it's happened now. There's nothing that can be done. All Russia could do is try and amend the mistake that they've made. It's a shame, though. It happened on Christmas. Bloody, you're meant to be celebrating on Christmas, but the plane crashed. It was quite sad news, actually. But forgetting about that for a minute and talking about something slightly more positive, Taiwan just created their first ever hypersonic missile. But this missile is really bloody advanced. It can fly up to 230,000 feet in the sky, which is in space. They've done this to try and scare China, but they said that not only can this missile travel 15 times the speed of sound, but Taiwan said, quote, it can intercept incoming ballistic missiles and any other projectiles. And what's interesting, as you might have just realized, is that this is actually an air defense system. It's not a missile used for carrying out attacks. Taiwan said, quote, this hypersonic missile system will allow us to form a multi-layer air defense system network, as it will be working with our other air defense missile systems at the same time. But as I said at the start, this isn't just any hypersonic missile which can carry out attacks just really fast. This hypersonic missile is able to travel into space, and it's able to intercept objects that are also flying in space. And to be fair, this is really interesting. If you're interested in this type of stuff, it could be one of the only missiles on the planet which is capable of shooting down an intercontinental ballistic missile. In short, nuclear weapons. Of course, if you don't know, nuclear missiles travel way faster than any conventional missiles. Because they travel so much higher and they travel in space. But as this new Taiwanese air defense hypersonic missile can also travel in space, it might be one of the few systems that can shoot down these nuclear missiles. But one of the really cool things, which I want to focus on, is that this isn't an American system that's been given to Taiwan. This is actually one of the first weapons that Taiwan has ever produced entirely of their own accord. In fact, Taiwan said, quote, "This system was developed entirely in Taiwan." And that's actually really interesting. It means that if Taiwan is telling the truth and this missile is as capable as they make it out to be, it means that Taiwan is making some really advanced military equipment, which a lot of way more developed countries still aren't doing. Really worth knowing about though. Obviously, China's going to have something to think about this. Right, that's the end of the news for the day. I hope you learned something. The whole marketing of this is news that you won't find anywhere else by just watching the BBC. So hopefully you learned something. And if you did, leave a subscribe. It helps out a lot. And I'll see you in the next video.